Hey everyone, welcome back to How to Build a Blog with Laravel. This is part 31 of our super long series, and this is taking absolute beginners from knowing nothing about Laravel up to building a pretty cool advanced blog application. Now, we've done a lot so far. We just finished all of our authentication, and I think hopefully you guys are really happy with what we were able to do with our authentication. We kept it simple, and I know that, but it is a very powerful authentication system with all the basic features you need to get up and running. So hopefully you found that useful. Again, I do promise that we will do more advanced authentication stuff in the future. That's going to come up as soon as I finish up this tutorial series. So for this video, part 31, we're going to actually be working with relational databases. So we're going to be working on creating a categories system where we can attach categories to blog posts. And we'll be able to modify and manage our categories independently of our blog posts, and we just link a blog post to a category, okay? And the way we do that is with relational databases. We're going to be learning a one-to-many relationship today, and that's why we're going to be working with categories, is to explore that one-to-many relationship and to learn how Laravel handles those relationships inside of Eloquent or inside of Laravel and stuff like that. So it's going to be a good episode today, guys. I've got a ton of stuff, so we're going to be moving very quickly. There's going to be lots of code. I'll have all the code available for download at the end of the video. So you might want to watch this one over a couple times to get everything out of it. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome back, everybody. Today it's all about relational databases. This is a huge milestone for you guys. First of all, I want to say that if you've made it this far, congrats. We have learned so many awesome things, and in these videos coming up, we're going to be moving a lot quicker because we can. Because you guys have already learned some of the basics of how controllers work, you know what models are, you know how to create basic actions for control, all that stuff, the CRUD, everything. We're going to be able to move a lot faster. I'm not going to have to re-explain all those things, and I'm just going to assume you watched the previous video. If you haven't, click the description down below, and you're going to want to check out the playlist, and you may want to start from the beginning. Anyway, this video is going to be a huge milestone in our learning because we're going to be learning an extremely powerful concept in any sort of web framework or web application, and that's working with relational databases. Okay, we've been doing databases up to this point. We learned how to create, posts and stuff like that in our database. We learned all of that kind of stuff. However, what we haven't learned is how to connect two different tables in a database together. How can we get different tables to talk to each other and stuff like that? And this is a very powerful concept that as we start getting into more advanced applications, we're going to be relying heavily on this. We're going to have more relationships than you know what to do with, okay? And so we're going to talk a little bit about relationships today, and we're going to be working with one of these relationships to connect our categories. That's what this video is about. And you guys, you might need to rewind this video because it's going to be jam-packed full of information, just tons of information in it. So get ready to learn. The categories are going to be split into two videos. This video today, we're actually going to create the migrations and the models for our category, create a table in the database for it. And then we're also going to look at the relationships and actually connect posts and categories together through Laravel and kind of see how that works. And then the next video, we're actually going to create like a user interface where we can create new posts and we can edit, delete them, all that stuff, the CRUD part, and kind of do it more dynamically. So we're actually going to work on the user interface and in the next video. And then this video, we're just going to be looking at the nuts and bolts of how it works, okay? So let's go ahead and get started. First things first, we need to understand what relational databases are, or what relationships in databases are. So let's take a look at that before we start coding and just diving right in. All right, now to understand how a little bit more about relational databases, I want to show you guys kind of an example that I've created to maybe help you understand it a little bit better so you can kind of see what I'm talking about when I say the word relationships, okay? So let's take a look at what that means. So what you can see here is that we've got a users table. Now in this table, we can think about this as some sort of like an employee management system. So we've got each user is going to have their job, their name, obviously, what their job is, their job title, and then the department that they work for. All right, so you can see here that we've got, John Doe he's a JavaScript developer and he works in the programming department. Jane Smith is a PHP developer. She also works in the programming department. Alex Curtis here, I used to be a marketing manager. So I'm a marketing manager. I work in the marketing department and factory worker. And then Daffy Duck is a factory worker working in the production department, okay? So this all seems really, really good. This seems like a good way to store information, right? And this is kind of equivalent to what we are doing right now. We're basically storing information in this manner. We've got one database that we've created, and then each of these columns represents, an item of information that we would store about somebody. So in this case, we've just got their job title and their department. Now we could add more columns and store more types of information. So let's take a look at how that might work if we were to expand that. So here we're taking the exact same information, but we're storing their manager and the location that they work at. Now in this example, we're assuming that the programming department works in a different location than maybe the marketing department and so forth. But the thing that you'll notice here is that there's a lot of repetition going on in this database. For example, everyone that works in the programming department is going to have Susan as a manager because she's the manager of the programming department. Everyone that works in the marketing department is going to have Alex as a manager, and everyone in the production department is going to have Tommy as a manager because they all work in that department. And this other information that we're collecting is relative to that department, okay? Also, everyone that works in the production department is going to work over at this address, 987 Best Avenue. Everyone working in the marketing department is going to work at this address, and the programming department is all going to work at this address. So it makes you wonder that as you start collecting tons and tons of employees here, this is a simple example, but as you start collecting more and more employees, there's going to be a lot of repetition. This causes problems as we start looking into things like, what if, let's say Susan gets fired or replaced, maybe she gets promoted and someone else becomes the manager of the programming department. Now you've got to go through and everybody that was working in the programming department, you now have to go and make sure that you've updated their manager inside of the user's table. And that becomes a huge headache for you to do. It'd be a lot easier if you could just change it in one place and then that information would automatically propagate through to everyone that works in the programming department, okay? Now, this is a common scenario you run into with web applications. With almost any web application, you're going to run into these types of scenarios where you have information that you need to connect. You need to connect one piece of information to another, but because they're different pieces of information, you may need to still keep them separately, and that's where relationships come in. I'm not quite to the relationships yet, but let me show you another example how we could simplify what we're doing here, and that's by actually pulling out all the department information into its own database table. So what you see here is we've created now a department's database table. This department's database table tells us that everyone working at the marketing department works at this address and has that manager. Everyone in the programming department works here and has this manager and so forth. Okay, so we've taken the same information we had before, but now it's contained in one place, one table, which makes it super easy. So now if we get a new manager, we change the location, we can update it in this one table, and we know that everyone working in marketing is going to have that information, which is better than duplicating it in the previous table. Now where this gets tricky is how do I link, how do I tell people that, well, everyone working in programming is also going to have this location in this manager without making it too complicated? That's kind of the goal that we're looking at. You can see how both of these programmers obviously are going to share this same information that we've got down here They're going to work in the programming department with that location, and they're going to have Susan as a manager. Okay, so that's kind of what we're looking at. And you can see that obviously marketing is going to associate there, and then production is going to associate there, and stuff like that. But we need to find a better way to connect these together. And that's why relational databases exist. It allows us to pull information out, create all these different tables, but we can link them together using these relationships. And that's what we're going to be doing today. So what we want to do in this case is we want to restructure our database, our users table, to adapt to these relationships, okay? This relationship database model. And this is how it works in practice. This is kind of, this is the way that it would normally work. What we would normally do here is we would rename something up here to department ID. You remember when we talked about IDs and originally, we talked about how every item in a database has a unique identifier at the beginning. We call this the primary ID. Okay, so it makes sense that and we've also talked about that IDs are the fastest way to find tables, and they're always unique. So even if we delete an entry in a database, that primary ID never gets reused again. So primary IDs are ideal ways to reference other items in other tables, because we can just say, hey, there's the departments table, and if I could get access to ID number 1 in the departments table, we know what that would represent. Even if some of these other items change, that primary ID will always be the same. So this allows us to basically create a column up here. Instead of having a department column, we would call it department ID. This is just considered good practice. You could technically call it anything, but if to make life easy and to follow the principles and consistencies that most developers follow, you would generally call it the name of the table _ ID. In this case, we would have departments, so you would do the singular version, department, and then _ ID. Okay, now if you were referencing a user in here, you could, in the departments table, you would do something like user ID to reference back to the users table. So in this case, we're going to call it department ID, but instead of writing these out like this, what we'll do is we'll just reference the ID number. So in this case, John Doe works for programming, so we'll just reference the ID for the second one, which you see down here, so it references the programming. And we can go through and do this for the rest of our tables. So we've got, we'll connect marketing, which is number 1, and then production, which is number 3. And then through Laravel, we're going to create these connections, telling Laravel basically how this works, that each of these connect to these IDs down here. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that's the an easy way to kind of see this visually. And this helps a lot as we start changing information now. Okay, so now let's say we decide to change the name of the department from programming to, say, development. Well, now we can just do that by just changing it down here to development in the name. Because everything is still linked, John Doe and Jane Smith are linked to the department number 2, they're automatically going to change to development. So now when we reference John Doe, when we pull his user record out, we're going to look for user ID 2, and then when we get the name of his department, it's going to automatically be development. We're not going to have to change any code in order to make this change, because we're going to create this dynamically. These dynamic relationships allow us to basically have this information updated dynamically without having to worry about making sure that the database is up to date and any programming changes or anything like that. I'm referencing department number 2 in the code, and now because his department has changed from programming to development, every time I reference that name column in his that connects to his department ID, because I've got that relationship, I'll automatically now start getting development for all these users that were connected to that. Hopefully that made sense to you guys, okay? Databases can get confusing when you start really getting these twisted. But anyway, that's basically the way this works. Let's go ahead, let's dive back into... let's go ahead, let's dive back into the application and get started on actually writing one of these relationships ourselves. Okay, so the first thing I want to do to create this type of relationship is we need to create a table to store all of our categories. Makes sense, guys. You guys should be well aware of this. We're going to create a categories table in our database. That way we don't need to manually write in our post table. We don't need to manually have a categories column where we manually write the name of the category associated with that. What we're going to do is we're soon going to create a category ID column in the post table, and then we're going to link that ID column to a row in our categories table. This will allow us to have tons of information about categories if we wanted, and it'll allow us to kind of create and update and delete things, all sorts of stuff like that, but we're going to do it dynamically with these relationships, okay? So we need to create a migration, and we also need to create a model, all right? So let's go ahead and do that. We can do that through the terminal. I went ahead and made the font a little bit bigger for you guys, so it'll be a lot easier to follow along now. That was a complaint I heard from a few of you guys, was the terminal text was really, really small, which I totally agree. So first things first, what we want to do is we're going to do PHP artisan make, and we're going to tell it to make a model. We're going to make a category model to work with, okay? That's going to be the model that handles us all the actions that we need for working with categories, okay? And then soon what we're going to do is we'll go back in a minute and we'll actually connect that model to our post model, which we already have, okay? So let's create a model. We're going to say make model, and we're going to call it category. Now, you guys should remember from before, when we make models, we actually just use the singular form and we add a capital letter at the beginning, okay? So this is the convention that you would normally follow, and you wouldn't call it categories, you'll call it category, all right? The database table will be called categories, plural, because it stores many categories, but the model will always be the singular form with a capital letter at the beginning, all right? So this is just going to be category. Now, if you wanted, you could also add migration here, and it'll automatically create the migration, but I'm gonna just do it separately because I'm gonna show you guys a trick about migrations as well, but either one works, however you guys wanna do it. So we'll do PHP artisan make model category. Let's go ahead and click that. We've got our model created. And then while we're at it, let's go ahead and create the migration. So we'll do the same thing. We'll do PHP artisan make, and this time we'll do migration. We're gonna name the migration create categories table, all right? Because that's what we're doing. We're creating a table for our categories. And the other thing, the little trick I wanted to show you guys is you can also do something here where you can add a tag to this line where we can say create equals and then the name of the table that we want to create, categories, like that. And let me show you what that does in the code. So let's go ahead and click enter. It creates a migration. You can see it's called create categories table. Let's come back over to our code and then take a look at what we just created. So we're going to come over here to our database and then our migrations, and it's always going to be at the bottom because these are timestamps. So we click the timestamped here, and you can see that it says create categories table. That came from the name that we created up here, and that this is a migration. What you may see that's different from the last time we created the migration was that because we added this dash dash and then create equals categories, it automatically knew to create a categories table. So we can say here, you can see it automatically created this schema, create, and then categories, giving us the name of the table. It automatically created a primary IDs, and it automatically created timestamps. Just a little fun thing to learn. It also automatically added the drop. And normally you wouldn't get this. You would just get an empty file when you do it without that create. So without this little tag up here. So it's just a fun way, helpful little way to create migrations that you guys might not know about. All right, so and remember that dash dash create is if you're doing a brand new table. I'm going to show you're going to use dash dash table if you're using an existing table, which we'll do in a second here when we do our next migration. Okay, so we're working on our categories table. The categories table only really needs one piece of information right now. We're just going to have the name of our category, okay? I can't really think of anything else to store in our categories table, and this may not be a great example of a table, because normally with relational databases, the value comes because you have lots and lots of data in the table. But in this example, we're just going to have one column in addition to these columns that are already here. We're going to have a column for the name of the category, and that's it. So we're going to go here, and on the second line, we'll just do table, and we'll do string, and we'll say name. Okay, that'll be the name of the category. And we don't need to do anything to the down function because it's a drop, which is what we're just going to drop the database if we have to roll back. That's all I need to do for this migration. This is going to create a table called categories with a primary ID and a column for the name and then the timestamps. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. We've got that saved. I'm going to close that. And then the next thing I do before I connect my tables is I'm going to go through and edit now the posts table. We're going to go to the post table and create a column in the post table that has our that's going to link to the category for each post. We're going to do this with category ID. So if you remember in our example, we did department ID. This time we're going to do category ID. And then that column is just going to have an integer in it that links to the primary ID in our categories table. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that real quick. We're going to make another migration now. We're going to do PHP artisan make migration. And then we're going to do add. You can call this whatever you want, but you just be descriptive when you do it. We're going to say add category ID to posts. All right, and then we're going to do the opposite, like what we did up here. We automatically assigned a new table to be created called categories. In this case, we already have, we're going to be adding something to an existing table. We're adding it to the posts table. So instead of doing create, we're going to do table. So we'll do table equals posts. All right, and now it's automatically going to link to the existing table, so we can just add a column to the existing table instead of creating a new table. Okay, so let's go ahead and click enter. It's going to create that migration. If you come back over to Sublime here and open up, you can see now this is the one we were just looking at. There's a new one here, and in this one we can do this is our add category ID to posts, and you can see that it automatically is linking to the table called posts. And we just need to add whatever we want to add here, and that's it. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to do table, and we're going to do integer like that. And we're going to call this column category ID, just like that. Okay, so that's the column that we have. It's going to create a column, an integer column, because that's all it needs to be is a number, an integer column called category ID. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to also add a few extra things here at the end. I'm going to make it optional. Only reason I'm making it optional is just in case you forget to add a category. It's not going to break saving. Also because this is going to prevent us from having to write a script to go back. If we make it required, we have to go back and make sure that we don't have a category. We have a category associated with every single post. For this example, I'm not going to worry about it. In production, you may want to worry about it. It might be something you wanted to worry about. For now, I'm going to do nullable, which basically means make it optional. All right. The other thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to do after slug. That's just going to place the column after slug and before the created at and updated at in our database. Not needed, just something I want to do. And then the last thing I'm going to do, which is going to be kind of important to do, is I'm going to add unsigned. Like this, okay? So we'll just do unsigned, and what unsigned means is that with an integer, you can have, with integer columns in Laravel or any database, you can have signed and unsigned integers. Signed integers are gonna have a plus or a minus, which means they go up to like, I think it's 256, and down to negative 256. In this case, we don't need to ever go negative. All of our primary IDs are always going to be positive, so we can make it an unsigned integer, meaning instead of storing all the positive numbers and the negative numbers, just store the positive numbers. Never worry about a negative. This allows, with the exact same amount of memory, for us to go up much higher. It doubles the amount of memory, or it cuts the amount of memory in half, basically, and allows us to go up twice as high with our integers, okay? Just get in the habit when you're connecting foreign IDs that you want to do this. Okay, so that's basically all we need to do. I am going to address one thing here just to prevent potential confusion in comments, because I know this is going to come up in the comments. I'm just going to go ahead and hit this head on. There is also, and I'll link to this in the description, there is also another helper when you're creating migrations called table foreign. Now, I haven't really used this verbiage yet in any, gosh, I wish I could type. I get talking, I can't type and talk at the same time. Anyway, there's one called foreign, table foreign, and this basically is where you manually assign in the database. At the database level, you actually tell the database that you're creating a foreign key. Okay, so what you would do in this case is you would do foreign category ID, and then you would say references ID on categories. All right, so this is basically what you would do. This is something that you can do when you're working with it. And I know a lot of people are going to probably mention this in the comments. That's why I wanted to bring it up head on. I honestly never do this. You can do this, but the thing to keep in mind is that not every database supports this type of encoding, if this makes sense. By default, MySQL installations are generally InnoDB, INNODB. It's just an encoding for the database, and the InnoDB doesn't support foreign key manually, written into the database. It doesn't actually support this feature. So I don't think this throws an error, but it just doesn't do anything, is what it does when you have InnoDB. If I open up my database, I'll kind of show you guys. When I come over here to blog, you can see that you can see that the database engine for this table is InnoDB. All right, now when you're creating a new table, there are other options here for all sorts of different types of tables. What the other popular database encoding is called MyIsum, and this one does support these foreign key relationships directly in the database, but it's also slower at retrieving data, and there's trade-offs. And I don't want to start a whole discussion on which one's better, because this is a long debated discussion on which one's better, the InnoDB or MyIsum. I don't want to get into that. Some are faster at certain things, some are slower at other things, and vice versa. It goes around. There's definitely benefits to the two different kinds. One of the differences is that MyIsum supports these foreign key references directly in the database, if this makes sense. We're not going to be using those, though. What we're going to be using is we're actually using references that happen on the Laravel level. Laravel's actually going to create, because of our reference, it's actually going to manually create two queries when we reference something via a primary or a foreign ID. I hope this isn't going over your heads, guys, but that's basically what's happening behind the scenes because of the restrictions that InnoDB has, which is the default MySQL type, all right? So the long story of all this is basically to say that you're going to see these foreign key things in some of the documentation if you go to Laravel.com. You probably don't need to worry about it. I honestly never worry about it. We're going to set the relationship a different way through actually hard-coded into Laravel, and then it's going to use PHP to manually connect those instead of relying on the database to do it itself, if that makes sense. The reason I don't rely on this is just because I generally am not using MyIsum, so it generally isn't supported at all. So this is extra code that doesn't do anything, and I don't believe it'll throw an error. It might, but I don't believe it'll throw an error. I think nothing happens. So it just is extra complicated on something that doesn't need to be. Okay, I just want to hit that in the bud before it gets brought up in the comments. I just want to bring it up so everyone can kind of see, understand what's going on with that. Okay, so that's why I do it this way. However, the one thing you need to make sure that you do have when you are creating a foreign key type thing like this is it needs to be an integer, and you're going to want it to be unsigned. All right, make sure you have at least those. If you want to get rid of these, you can. I like to keep it nullable just because, just so I'm not forcing the category on someone. And then after is not important at all unless, for me, you're actually just using a GUI to look at the database or something. I like having created at and updated at the very end. So I want to pull this up right before the end. So that's kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing. So that's where I get all of this, just in case you guys are wondering. All right. Now, moving on, we should have, this is going to create a category ID column in our database, our post table. And then down here, what we need to do is we just need to do the drop a column. So we're going to do table, drop column, and then we're just going to drop the category ID column. And that's all we need to do for that. And that's just in case we roll back our database. Okay, the next thing we need to do is actually run the migration. Let's go ahead and do that. We'll do PHP artisan migrate. That's going to run our 2 migrations. We had 2 of them pending that we hadn't ran yet. And if we go back to our database, where I was before, and we look at our blog, we will see now that we have a categories table with an ID, a name, and then our timestamps. And now in our post table, we've got this category ID right here. Okay, let's head back over to Sublime. And now what we're going to do, you can actually clean up everything we're working on. We don't need the database anymore or our configs. Next thing we're going to do is actually go to our model. So come to our app, and then we're going to go to category and look at the new model we created. You can see that there's nothing in here yet, but if you remember from our previous stuff, remember that everything got inherited from this extends model. So we have all the basic CRUD functionality built in, the ability to find and replace, and all that stuff's built in. So even though it looks empty, it's actually packed full of useful stuff, all right? In this code block here is where we can overwrite what got extended in the model, and we're gonna do that right now. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna manually tell this model to use the categories table. Normally this is not needed, but I just like to, I just like to do this when I have funky table names, okay? Or if you're using a table name that's outside of the convention, then you need to manually tell the model which table to use, okay? If you have a user model, it automatically assumes the user's table, so you don't need to manually write this. If you have a post model, it assumes the posts table. Now, if you get weird with your conventions and you don't follow the conventions and you call, let's say you call, you have a post model, but you call the table blog posts, then you need to manually tell it because it's going to be looking for posts, and you need to manually tell it it's called blog posts. In this case, I'm going to manually tell it that it's called categories, okay? Because it's a little bit different spelling. I don't think you actually need to do this, but I just want to show you guys anyway. So we're going to create a protected attribute. We're going to call it protected. We're going to say table equals, and then we're going to set it equal to categories like that. Okay, that's all you need to do. Now you're telling Laravel, use the categories table when working with this model. Again, we didn't do this before because we were following the convention. We created a post model. It knew that it goes to the posts table. We created a users model. It assumed that it goes to the users table as well. Okay, so this is why we're defining it this time and we didn't last time. Okay, moving on, the next thing we need to do is actually define the relationship. So this is where we actually are going to create a method and we're going to tell it that the category is going to have many posts. Okay, so one category item, if we create a category called PHP tutorials, that category may have a whole bunch of different posts in it, okay? We call that a has many relationship, okay? Or one-to-many relationship. This is, the category is the one and it has many posts, okay? And that's what we're going to be telling it here. Now to set up that relationship, we create a public function. We name the function whatever we want, but it's really good to follow a convention. In this case, we're going to call it posts, okay? Because it belongs to many posts. So we're going to call it posts. And inside of here, all we need to do is say return, and we're going to say this has many, and then we're going to tell it the model that it should connect to. So we're going to say app hat, and then make sure you're doing the backslash again, not this type of slash, but that type of slash. We're going to do app post, and we're going to say that it has many posts is basically what we're saying here, okay? So we're connecting it to the posts model. Okay, that's all we actually have to do there, and it's going to connect it now to the posts model, and it knows that this ID is going to associate with a categories ID in the posts model, all right? That's all happening behind the scenes in Laravel, and Laravel is assuming that, all right? I'm gonna link this in the description if you wanna read up more about these relationships and you wanna see kind of more of what's happening. What we're doing here is what's called it's called a one-to-many relationship. So take a look at the one-to-many part. We're going to be working on many-to-many in the tags video, okay? And we'll go over both of those here. The one-to-one relationships are identical to the one-to-many relationships, which is what we're doing here. So if you do have a one-to-one relationship that you want to work on, it's almost identical. The only difference is instead of has many here, you will do has one. And that's all you need to do, all right? That's the only difference. Otherwise, you set them up exactly the same. Obviously, the difference is saying that the category would only belong to one post. In this case, has many says it can have many posts. That's the difference, all right? But I'll link this in the description if you want to learn more about how to do this. There's some other options you can add at the end of has many if you need to. Again, if you don't follow the conventions and you need to manually define the column name that the ID, that the integer is in, then you would set that up in here, okay? But we're following the convention. We created a table, or a column called categories ID, or category ID, and so we don't need to do that because we followed that convention. So Laravel already knows what to assume, okay? So we've created one part of the relationship. We said, hey, the categories have many posts. Well, now what we need to do is we need to go to our post model and say that, set up the other half of the relationship, saying that the posts are going to belong to a category, all right? So let's go over to the post model and set that one up. So I'm gonna go ahead and save this, close our category model, and open up our post model. And here we're gonna do the same thing. So we're gonna create a public function, and we're gonna call this one categories. All right, and inside of here, we're gonna do the same thing we did before. We're gonna say return this, but this time instead of has many, we're gonna say belongs to, like that, all right? So we're saying that this is the post now. The post belongs to a category, all right? And the categories have many posts. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, links in the description if you wanna read the Laravel documentation on this. Now, inside of the parentheses here for belongs to, we're gonna actually connect it to the model for categories, all right? In the categories model, we connected it to the post model. In the post model, we connected to the categories model. So they're both pointing at each other. That's the important thing. Keep that in mind, guys, okay? So we're gonna do belongs to app / category, okay? Just following the exact same convention. Again, if you want to look at the Laravel documentation, you can see how to connect different types of foreign keys, or if you want to customize that or something like that. Okay, that's all we need to do for this. We now have created something where they connect and talk to each other. So now let's go ahead and test it. What I'm going to do for this tutorial, just to finish up this tutorial, is we're going to manually create a category in our database, and then we're going to manually link it in the database. But in the next video, we're actually going to create the user interfaces where we would make this happen, that the users would connect categories. But just to show that everything we've done works in this video, I'm going to go ahead and do it manually and just show you guys how it would work. And it's going to be good to visualize how the database is being created. Okay, so let's come on over to I'm opening up our database here. You can see here that we've got empty category IDs. And if we go to categories, we have no categories. So let's go ahead and create a category. I'm going to click it, and I'm just going to call the category PHP tutorials, all right? Just like that. And we're not going to create the created at or updated at, but it would normally be created when you do it. So but we're not going to worry about it right now. Okay, so we created one category called PHP tutorials. Let's create another one actually. And we're going to call this one Ruby on Rails tutorials. I am going to be doing some Ruby on Rails tutorials coming up as well. I love Ruby on Rails. I use Ruby on Rails a little bit more than I use Laravel for clients, just because Ruby on Rails to me is a little bit faster and easier to use. But I actually have more experience with Laravel, ironically. Ruby on Rails is a little bit newer for me, but it's actually a really cool, it's a great framework. I actually really like using it. It's got a lot of cool stuff in it. But anyway, we'll be doing some of those as well. I want to go back and recreate this application that we just did in Ruby on Rails so you guys can learn it both ways and decide which framework is right for you, okay? There's pros and cons to both of them. That's why I know both of them, is because there are times when PHP is going to be better to use, and there's times when Ruby on Rails is better, and there are pros and cons, and I'll talk about that in a future video. Okay, anyway, we're going to create two categories. One's Ruby on Rails tutorials, one's PHP tutorials. Okay, you can see they each have an ID number, 1 and 2. And now I'm going to connect posts to our categories. So let's go over to our posts table. And in this category ID, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a number, either 1 or 2. Okay, so we'll just do 1, 2, 2, and 1. All right. So they're all linked to a category. All right. Now let's go on. Let's create just a part in our view so that we can see how these work. And that'll finish up the tutorial, but I want to show you guys that these are now connected together. All this code we did, all this database stuff, and they're now connected together. So let's head on over to Sublime. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up we're going to open up a view, and then let's go to our single blog post. Okay, so under views, we're going to go to blog post and single. This basically shows an individual blog post, and it shows the title and then the body. All right, this is where like the public would read our blog post. What we're going to do is create a horizontal rule, and then we're going to create another paragraph down here, and we're going to say posted in this category. Okay, so posted in, and then we'll do our double brackets, and this is where we're going to reference post. Now, we've jumped right into this view. I just want to mention that we can access post because you can see we've got the whole post object here. And this is why relationships are cool. Even though we had that like ID number over there, we can actually access the information in the other table because the two tables are now connected with that ID number. So when we grab an object, just like we did before, look, I'm not changing anything in the controller. The controller is exactly the same. The controller went out and found the post with that slug, and it just grabbed all the information about that post and then threw it into the view. So now the exact same object I had before, I can now access the name of the category with the exact same object. All right, I didn't need to change anything in the controller, add any other code. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to post. I'm going to call it category and then name. And I'll show you in a second why I'm doing that, but this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do post, category name, and what I'm expecting is that it will show the name of the category that this blog post belongs in. I'm going to go up here and save this, and we're going to boot up the server and then take a look at it. Okay, so we haven't booted up the server yet, so I'm going to go over here and PHP artisan serve, and then here we are right here. So we've got our blog post. And I'm just going to click on this first blog post here. We're going to read more. And you can see that this is posted in PHP tutorials. And let's just head back and let's click on the next one, read more. And this one's posted in Ruby on Rails tutorials. So it's pulling the name of our category directly out of that database. It's automatically connected thanks to those relationships we set in the models. All right. So this is pretty cool, guys. I hope you guys see how cool this is. This is pretty sweet. Okay, so this is really fun stuff. I just want to show you guys real quick. We head back over to our database. And in fact, what I'll do here, I'll just, Great Balls of Fire is this one right here. I'm just going to change this category right now to 1. This is going to connect it from Ruby on Rails. Now it's going to say PHP tutorials. I'm going to click enter and come back over here now and just refresh. And you can see how it automatically pulls that in just as super easy, right? So these two tables are connected. I hope you guys see how cool that is and how powerful that is. We're doing a very simple use case, but you can start adding tons of information through relational databases now because of this, all right? So I just want to show you guys that. Now the last thing I'll show you, if I come over to categories and let's call this PHP tutorials, we'll just call it PHP tuts. Like that. And now if I come over here and refresh, you can see how it's automatically updated as well. All the databases are connected together. They're automatically pulling information and stuff like that. All right. Last thing I'll show you before we finish up the video is let's come back over to our project. And you're probably wondering why I chose category and then name. All right. So I just want to show you that real fast. I'm going to open up our model for post. Okay. Since we know this post object is a object of the post model, all right, which is this. Okay, so that $post is an object of this model right here. All right, so what we can do, the reason I did that, I called it category, the category method was because, or the category property was because we have this category method right here. Okay, this category method initiates this relationship. Now, it also, as part of what it does, as part of what this belongs to does, it sets up not only the method, but also the property. And that's what I was accessing here. You can see I didn't use parentheses. We did not do this. If we did this, it'll break. Watch, if we do the parentheses and I refresh, we'll get an error now, okay? And that's because what we're actually doing here is we've actually like initiated the method, okay? We don't want to do that. Just Laravel handle the method. What you're going to be calling is the property, okay? Which doesn't need the parentheses. Okay, and that's automatically created here. So we create the method called category with the $sign. So okay, so that's the category. So it's because of this. So we just access this property. And then once we're inside of here, we have access to all of the column names inside the database. So inside of our database, we have a column for ID number, for name, for created at, and for updated at. So if I set this created at real quick, I'll do it to, okay, so I'm just setting some information here for our database. Not doing anything fancy. I just want to basically show you guys that we can access these other properties, right? So that'll be fine. All right, so I added a created at and updated at label. And so now if we come back over here, I can access anything in the category database, all right? Now I just chose name, but if I wanted to do created at, I could grab the created at value in here as well. So let me come back here. Now you can see that we're grabbing the created at item. I could also call the updated at. And you can see it's going to change a little bit, or the ID number or anything like that. I can choose any item from there because we're actually grabbing all of the, this is the actual category ID. All right, so we can grab all of that information from here. And you could also just grab the category ID without initiating the relationship. So this would just grab the category ID out of the post column, which would also be 1. Okay. So anyway, just want to show you guys how that works. This is pretty cool because as you start getting to like pulling in entire user records, you can actually do something like this. If you had like an author, you could grab the user's birth date. You know what I mean? Because you would probably have the birth date in the users table. And so you could now connect the post's author to, so you could have maybe something like this. The post author would probably have would probably link back to the users table and have all the, and then you could get anything out of the users table for the person that wrote the blog post, if that makes sense. That's why this is so powerful. Okay, let's just undo everything. And we're gonna go back. We've got category and name, and that will give us the name of the category, for this tutorial, all right? So, or for this blog post, I mean. So hopefully that makes sense, guys. That is a ton of information about relational databases. Explained it a lot. In the next video, we're going to dive through the CRUD. That'll go pretty quick because we're going to be we're just going to be creating the CRUD for our categories, so we can create categories and link them to posts and stuff on the front end of the website. That's what the next video is all about. So be sure to join me for that one, guys. That'll be a lot of fun. But I hope you saw a lot of value in what we learned today. This is a powerful concept. And once you master relationships, it really expands what you're able to do. As a side note, a lot of the questions I've been getting, people emailing me and stuff, are asking me like, okay, I want to create this type of app, a dating app, a social media app, whatever. And they ask, how would I set my database up? And it almost always comes down to relationships. You have to have lots of complex relationships to make it work. If you've got a social network, you've got to have users, but then if they're going to say like a photo, those photos need to have relationships with, if their photos that belong to their profile need to have relationships to their profile. And then if they like those, you have to have all those likes have to have relationships to the person that liked them. And all the comments have to have relationships to the user that wrote them, and also relationships to the post that they belong to. It gets very complicated with all the relationships that you need, but relationships are pivotal in learning to program more advanced applications from just the basic stuff we've been doing up to this point. All right. So you really want to spend some time to understand and, better understand relationships in databases. Hopefully you learned a lot from this one, but of course this is only the top. This is only skimming the top of the information that you will want to learn as you start growing as a web developer. Okay. So this is only just, getting your taste buds, trying this stuff out, but there's so much more to learn from here. All right, the next video we're going to work on user interfaces for our categories, so I'll see you guys in the